Hello everyone. In this presentation, we will be discussing two chapters. The chapter 1 is based on game theory and negotiations in Bible, and chapter 2 is bargaining procedures and the problem of honesty. Game theory is a study of mathematical models of strategic interactions among rational decision makers. It can be applied to all fields of social science as well as in logic, system science, and computer science. Game theory, in the form known to economists, social scientists, and biologists today, was given its first general mathematical formulation by John von Neumann and Oskar Morgenstern in 1944. For some reasons, due to some limitations in their initial framework, their theory was only applicable under special and limited conditions. However, since late 1970s, it has been possible to say that game theory is the most important and useful tool in the analyst's kit. Long before game theory had come along to show analysts how to think about this sort of problem systematically, it had occurred to some actual military leaders and influenced their strategies. The Spanish conqueror Cortes, when landed in Mexico with a small force, who had who had good reasons to fear their capacity to repel attack the far more from the far more numerous Aztecs, removed the risk that his troops might think their way into his retreat by burning the ships on which they landed. They burned the ships very visibly. Seeing this, Aztecs reasoned as any commander who could be so confident in to destroy his own option to be prudent if the battle went badly for him must have good reasons for such extreme optimism. It cannot be wise to attack an opponent who has a good reason for being sure that he cannot lose. This For this, the Aztecs therefore retreated into the surrounding hills, and Cortes had the easiest possible victory. The basic elements of game theory are utility, games and rationality, trees and matrices, and solutions, concepts and equilibria. Utility: an economic agent is an entity with preferences. Games theorists, like economists and philosophers, study rational decision-making, describes these by means of an abstract concept called utility. This refers to some ranking on some special scale of the subjective welfare or the change in subjective welfare that an agent derives from an object or an event. Games and rationality: all solutions in which at least one agent can only act to maximize his utility through anticipating the responses to his actions by one or more uh, than other agents is called game. Agents involved in games are referred to as players. Game theorists assume that players have sets of capacities that are typically referred to in the literature of economics as comprising rationality. Trees and matrices: the differences between game of perfect and imperfect information is related to a distinction between ways of representing games that is based on order of play. The moves in the games can be sequential or simultaneous. A game tree is an example of what mathematicians call a directed graph. That is, it is a set of connected nodes in which the overall graph has a direction. Matrices, unlike trees, simply show outcomes represented in terms of the players' utility functions for every possible combination of strategies players might use. In terms of solutions concept and equilibria, game theorists refer to the solutions of games as equilibria. It means that when a situation is in a stable state. Bible is a sacred document to millions of people. It expresses supernatural elements of faith that do not admit of any natural explanations. However, Bible gives various examples of negotiations and decisions made based on those negotiations. Text discusses three examples: Cain's murder by his brother Abel, and second case is Rahab's agreement with the spies to help them, and the third case is where two mothers are fighting for a baby, claiming that the baby is theirs. In the first case, Cain's murder, after being expelled from the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve became parents, first to Cain and then to Abel. Cain was a tiller of the soil and Abel a shepherd. Cain brought an Within a time, Cain brought an offering to Lord from the fruit of soil, and Abel brought his finest firstlings of his flock. God paid heed to Abel and his offerings, ignoring Cain altogether. In this case, God appears to meddle directly in the affair of brothers by playing favorites. And then, out of jealousy um, induced in Cain, and Cain murdered his brother. In this case, Cain had three actions open to him after committing the murder. First, admit the murder; second, deny the murder; and third, defend his morality. Looking at the tree, both players have rational choices to make. As conflict was stirred by God himself, Cain murdered his brother out of jealousy, and as a punishment, God punished him by but by being merciful, he let him live, but he will wander earth for eternity. Similarly, in case 2, Rahab made a deal with spies in order to save her family. Besides two choices, she made a rational decision to follow the instructions of the spies in order to save herself and her family. And however, in the third case, to bring out the truth, the king ordered to kill the baby to see which mother was baffled more. Obviously, the mother of the baby, who was truly baby's mother, will be baffled more, and she agreed to give the baby to the other lady in order to save the baby. Uh, she rather want her child to be living, mm, and be raised up by another woman and not being dead. So in this case also, the king had two choices, but he made a decision and he opted a rational and intelligent option.
Hi, this is Simran Ahir. Now let's talk about bargaining procedure and the problem of honesty. I'll be covering honesty problem and bonus procedure. The honesty problem. Here, consider a buyer and a seller who have their reservation prices respectively. In a single offer bargaining situation, let's assume that buyer offers his reservation price and seller offers his reservation price. If the reservation price of buyer is greater than or equal to the reservation price of seller, buyer is willing to pay at least the price at which seller is willing to sell. Therefore, such exchange is feasible. Let's assume the exchange price is equal to the mean of the offers. If reservation price of buyer is less than reservation price of seller, there is no exchange to be made. Profit to buyer. Profit to buyer occurs when his reservation price is greater than or equal to seller's reservation price, or reservation price of buyer minus mean is positive number. Profit to buyer tends to be zero when reservation price of buyer is less than reservation price of a seller. Profit to seller. Profit to seller occurs when mean minus reservation price of seller is a positive number. Thus, if an exchange is feasible, the profit is the difference between each payer's reservation price and the exchange price. The profit to each player will be positive if the players offer overlap or coincides where reservation price of buyer is greater than reservation price of seller, or else zero otherwise, because there is no exchange to be made. Assuming the players' offers are simultaneous or equivalent, independent of each other in a non-cooperative game of incomplete information, then Chatterjee and Samuelson show that one pair of Nash equilibrium strategies of the player is not to be honest. A strategy pair is a Nash equilibrium if either player, by departing unilaterally from its choice, cannot improve its payoff and will in general do worse. Therefore, neither player will have an incentive to deviate from such an outcome, given that is adversely or also doesn't deviate, rendering in a stable point or equilibrium. To see what level of dishonesty is stable, assume that the buyer and seller both believe that the other player's reservation price is uniformly distributed over, or the probability density functions are buyer is equals to seller is equals to 1. This means that buyer thinks that reservation price of seller and seller thinks that reservation price of buyer is equally likely to fall anywhere in the interval between 0 and 1. Every number in this interval is equilibrium. In addition, assume that each player knows what the other player thinks. Each knows that the other player knows. Assumptions of honesty problem. Buyers and sellers will always do better. In this case, their lying will never hurt them because there will always be an agreement. Let's assume that buyer has seller's reservation price, which is for example 1 or 2, and a seller has buyer's reservation price, which is for example 2 or 3. Then it is rational for the buyers always to be truthful, for buyer to announce 1 or 2 and for seller to announce 2 or 3 accordingly to their reservation prices. Assume that the players' reservation prices in previous case are not discrete but vary continuously between 1 and 2 of the buyer and 2 and 3 of the seller. Although their truthfulness is still rational, it is not beneficial because only with the probability will each player's reservation price be at its end point 2, then the player will never agree. The bonus procedure. Under the bonus procedure, the player's payoff functions are modified so that each player receives a bonus when and only when an agreement is reached. Given that an exchange takes place at some price, the bonus changes the selection of a settlement from a constant same game of splitting the profit, which is assumed to be fixed or constant, so that what one player wins the other loses, into a constant sum game, wherein both players receive added value depending on the settlement they reach. Possible courses of this added value, which will vary with the player's strategy choices, will be considered later. The fact that the bonuses depend on the player's offer and so and not on private information, such as their reservation prices of buyer and seller, ensures that the procedure can be implemented.
The bonus appraisal procedure. The appraisal is a procedure that involves an external party who plays a different role from those of the bonus players. Bonus appraisal procedure assess and evaluate goods and services whose value is in dispute by independent evaluators (appraisers), who is assumed to be non-biased. The independent appraiser A determines an exchange price. Incorporating A into a bargaining process is to prevent collisions between the parties involved against the bonus payers. Let's assume B submits an offer, that is B to A for appraisal. S submits an offer, that is S to A appraisal. A choice for example for exchange price is if B is less than S, there is no settlement. If B is greater than or equal to S, there is a settlement. Settlement depends on where A lies in relationships to B and S. Let's take case number 1 for example. If S is greater than or equal to A, greater than or equal to B, A's choice prevails. Let's look at case 2. If A is greater than S, or S is greater than or equals to B, A's choice prevails. Case number 3. If S is greater than or equals to A, and A is greater than B, makes the settlement. Extant price for S in the 3 cases: A, case number 1A, case 2B, case 3A. A choice of an extant price is if B is less than S, there is no settlement. If B is greater than or equals to S, there is a settlement. Settlement depends on where A lies in a relationship to B and S. Case A. If S is less than or equals to A, less than or equals to B, A's choice prevails. In case 2, if A is less than S, less than or equals to B, A's choice prevails. Case 3, if SO is less than or equals to A is less than B, so S makes a settlement. Extant price for S in the 3 cases: case AA, case 2B, case 3A. Comparison of the bonus appraisal procedure to the bonus procedure. Number 1. Both players do what's under the bonus appraisal. A than the bonus procedure, B for S, and S for B. Number 2. B does better under the bonus appraisal (A) than the bonus S procedures. S is the same as (B) on the both. And number 3. S does better on the bonus appraisal A than the bonus B procedure. B does the same as on the both. Losses for both players in case 1 are exactly offset by the gains to B in case 2 to B, and case 3 to S. The 2 procedures will balance out in the 3 cases. If the bonus appraisal chooses compromises settlement near the median of the postulated probability distribution, bargainers might have more motivation to participate under the bonus appraisal procedures. The penalty procedures. This is the bargaining procedures where players' profit functions are modified to make truthful, re-evaluation, and dominant strategies. Each player's playoff is reduced by the factor that is based on the player's offer. Private information, for example, player's reservation price, is not used so as to ensure implement ability. Let R be into bracket B S represent the proportion of B playoff remaining after reduction calculation underneath. S playoff functions are is analogous. Assume S reservation price is distributed according to density function F, then the calculation analogs still inserted below. The penalty appraisal. In the procedures, the player's offer never directly determines the exchange price, which is always A if there is an exchange, unlike in bonus appraisal procedures where player B and S simultaneously submit their offer. B and S in the penalty appraisal procedures, A independently offers a valuation A of the subject. There is an exchange only if B is less than or equal to S. No exchange takes place unless A lies between the B and S, i.e., B is less than A, less than or equal to S. Under the penalty appraisal procedures, B player function is calculated below. B does not directly affect the player's offer serves only to determine whether or not the exchange is possible. The penalty appraisal procedure is analogous to the penalty procedures and duplicates its properties, whereas it induces truthful evaluation and its budget balancing. It is not export efficient, unlike the penalty procedure. The source of the penalty under the penalty appraisal procedure is not the ability that the settlements might not be implemented.
Under the bonus procedure and penalty procedure, it is assumed that the players' offers overlap, the exchange price is the arithmetic mean. The analogous procedures could be designed that make any weighted arithmetic mean the exchange price and need to forfeit some feasible trades under the penalty procedure. In addition to buyer and seller, the exchange price under the bonus appraisal procedure will be denoted by lowercase a. By comparison, under the penalty appraisal procedure, the player's offers never directly determine the exchange price. Notice that B's offer does not directly affect the payoff. Like the bonus procedure, the player offers serve only to determine whether or not exchange is possible. Like the bonus appraisal procedure, buyer and seller are assumed to know the probability distributions that describes A and B respectively and also have the common belief about the distribution. This procedure is analogous to the penalty procedure and duplicates its properties, whereas it includes truthful revelation and is budget balancing. But unlike the penalty procedure, the source of the penalty under the penalty appraisal procedure is not the probability that a settlement might not be implemented. Instead, it is a possibility that A's appraisal might not fall in the interval. This is the price exacted by the penalty appraisal procedure for its honesty-inducing property. As under penalty procedure, the greater the overlap in reservation prices when the player chooses the dominant strategies, the greater the probability that A will fall between and thereby realize as a settlement. The penalty appraisal procedure is equivalent to the posted price bargaining. Under posted price bargaining, an exchange price is given exogenously posted and the bargainers settle at the price if both agree to do so. Clearly, the bargainers have a dominant strategy of agreeing to trade if the posted price is more favorable to each as of their reservation prices. As with posted price bargaining, the appraisal under penalty appraisal procedures view the situation before A is revealed and is not specific to the price but instead to a random variable. Even given this uncertainty about A, buyer and seller will still be motivated to reveal the reservation prices. Although the penalty appraisal procedure may fail to attain many feasible settlements because A does not fall between the seller and buyer, it may be more efficient than penalty procedure at effecting exchanges for an interesting practical reason. Call A omniscient if he or she somehow knows the reservation prices, buyer and seller of the bargainers. If A is omniscient, all feasible settlements will be achieved without the need for an external subsidy. Typically, of course, A will not be omniscient. Nonetheless, savvy appraisers may be uncovering feasible settlements, be able to engineer exchanges under the penalty appraisal procedure, even when the overlap between the players is small. Insofar as appraisers are not omniscient, they, they may still wish to concentrate their choices in some truncated interval around the mean of the distribution of buyer and seller, where there is a greater likelihood that there will be an overlap interval which will fall. Thus, they may be able to increase the player's expected payoffs without sacrificing the ability of the procedure to induce honesty. As under the penalty appraisal procedure, the exchange price under the expansive appraisal procedure is always denoted by lowercase a. However, A's appraisal is determinative more often than under the penalty appraisal procedure. Hence, the nomenclature through the conditions under which an exchange takes place still depend on the offers by the buyer and seller. By contrast, the expansive appraisal procedure is less stringent. It effects the settlement whenever A is acceptable to at least one bargainer. When in fact only one bargainer views A as acceptable, the other bargainer will be aggrieved. Never can both bargainers be aggrieved, however, because the procedure does not force a settlement when both bargainers deem it unacceptable. Because one player may be forced to settle at a price less favorable than what it offers, the expansive appraisal procedure is not true bargaining procedure. Still, this procedure is not an arbitration procedure either, because there is a possibility that no settlement will be reached. Nonetheless, there are reasons why this hybrid procedure may be useful in practice, not the least of which is relatively high probability of effecting a settlement. Furthermore, it inherits from the penalty appraisal procedure the property of being honesty-inducing. The expansive appraisal procedure has no equivalent bonus or penalty procedure, unlike the other two appraisal procedures. Nevertheless, like the penalty appraisal procedure, it is honesty-inducing and budget balancing, but it is not ex post efficient. Also, it may fail to interim incentivize compatibility because it sometimes forces a player to settle at a price less favorable than its reservation price. It is hard to conceive of an unmotivated benefactor simply entering a dispute between two parties and making up the difference between their offers. Such a third party must, it would seem, also derive some benefit, tangible or intangible, from the settlement of the dispute. Benefits may take different forms. A government, as suggested earlier, could tax the players so, so as to break even, or at least not lose too much. But it would be vulnerable to collusion unless there were norms or sanctions that prevented its exploitation by the disputing parties, or there were an appraiser acceptable to both sides who could offer an independent judgment. Private organizations or even entrepreneurs might also play the role of benefactor, but they would surely have to charge fees for their services unless they possessed considerable amount of wealth as well as more than a modicum of altruism. Generally speaking, altruism alone will not be sufficient to motivate the dispensing of rewards, especially if the bonuses that might have to be paid are great. It was hardly altruism or pure goodwill, for example, that motivated Jimmy Carter in September 1978 to make an expensive promise to both Israel and Egypt at Camp David in return for accords that led to Israel's withdrawal from the Sinai, which it had occupied since 1967. Arab-Israeli 1967 Arab-Israeli War. By Carter's reckoning, neutralizing conflict, if not encouraging peace between the two major antagonists in the Middle East, would not only benefit the United States but also be a public good for many others. The billions of dollars in military and economic aid and the numerous security guarantees that the United States promised to both sides in return for their cooperation were major inducements that led to Camp David agreement. These may plausibly have been interpreted by the procedure.